Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188. Welcome to Gardening with Burke Nursery, the show where we help you grow your garden, increase the curb appeal of your yard, and share information on all your plants. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris, the horticulturalist at Burke Nursery and Garden Center. Spring is the time of year when every plant around you pokes their heads out of the ground and screams, "I'm back!" Not only are you beginning to see buds opening to flowers, but if you look closely at your houseplants, you'll find they just suddenly seem to be larger than you remembered a month ago. They're waking up from their winter slumber just as much as your outdoor plants. For this reason, spring is the best time of year for repotting your houseplants. Before I get into repotting techniques, I want you to take a side trip with me to my garden. With spring here, it's easy to forget that we had such a horrible winter storm this past January. That storm literally closed down I-95 here in Virginia. A lot of people don't realize that many of our trees and shrubs set their flower buds in June and July prior to the winter months. So, while the buds are waiting through the winter months to blossom in the spring, any harsh storm or unexpected freezing temperatures can injure the buds. And let me show you what I mean. In my garden, I have this beautiful rhododendron. This rhodie, as I prefer to call it, was planted in 2010. And if you look at this first picture, you'll see all these beautiful red flowers below the deck. And if you keep looking at the rhododendron, you'll notice that the top goes above the railing on that deck, and there are no flowers, nothing there. Well, there are leaves there, and when you do look at the next picture, and you look at that top of the shrub, you'll see that there are buds on top, but they aren't flowering. See, before the buds could flower, they froze due to the storms in January. And this is what is known as winter damage. I wanted to show you these pictures because I'm getting a lot of calls about trees or shrubs not flowering properly. And I'm expecting to get a lot more calls later this season that some fruit trees aren't producing as well as last year. You see, winter storms can disrupt the natural growth of your plant. But that doesn't always mean that your plant is going to die. My shrub will be fine. And in most cases, your trees and shrubs will also recover. So now, let's get on to repotting houseplants. What I have here is what I like to call a quintessential house plant gift, or a quintessential gift plant. And usually with these plants, there are several that are potted in a pot that usually, as in this case, doesn't have a drainage hole. And in this case, you have a plant here that is known as a pothos. And then you have a plant here that's known as a corn plant or a Dracaena. And you have here a palm. And then here is the fourth plant, which is a Dieffenbachia, also known as a dumb cane. And when you repot a plant, spring is the best time. And the choice of pot is critical. The general rule of thumb is that when you choose your pot, you only go up 1 or 2 pot sizes. And when you're looking at your quintessential gift plant, you can't always tell the pot sizes, but when I pull this out, what you'll notice is that it usually is about a 4-inch pot. And so a 4-inch pot is a pot that's about this size width. So what that means is when I want to plant these, transplant these, I want to go to a pot that's just slightly a little bit larger. And this pot, if I measure it, it's still around 4 inches. And because when you're measuring a pot, what you're measuring is you're measuring from the interior. And then this pot is 4.5 inches. So this pot is larger. The other thing is that when you're looking at a pot, and I'll talk about this in better detail, is you're also looking at the depth of the pot. So if the roots are shallow, you don't want to go too deep with the pot. Otherwise, what will happen is that the plant won't be able to know, the roots of the plant won't be able to know where to find the dirt. And so I have these pots here, and I have another Dieffenbachia here. So the reason I brought this in is that this Dieffenbachia is actually in a pot. So this one is easier for you to see that this pot size is, again, this is a 3-inch pot size. So when I look at this pot, then this will work, see? And with a plant that's in a pot, you already know the depth, so that's fine. But I'll have some people say, I know this plant eventually is going to grow large, so I want a large pot. And that's why I brought in this pot. Well, if I plant this in here, like I already said, the poor plant will get so lost. Its roots won't be able to find where the water is coming because there's going to be too much soil. So please try to go only 1 pot size, maybe 2 pot sizes up. The other is that there are many different types of pots. So this pot is a glazed pot, and on the interior of this pot, even though the exterior is glazed, the interior still has the terracotta. This pot is a terracotta pot. Now, all of my pots, the terracottas, I've used for years. And what I do in between each planting is I will actually sanitize this. And I will sanitize this with a bleach water solution, where I will take 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. But if you buy a new terracotta pot, then what you want to do is you want to soak it overnight. Because if you've never used a terracotta pot, then there's a tendency for it to leach all the natural elements that are important for that pot, for the soil of the plant. So remember, if you do that. Now the other is we have a plastic pot. I guess not only is this show repotting houseplants, but this show is all about pots as well. And this will work, but there's a tendency with plastic pots to hold on to more moisture than your terracotta pots. Terracotta pots don't hold, they whisk moisture out of there a lot sooner. The glazed pots are kind of medium when it comes to moisture. And then the other is the pot with no drainage hole. See, no hole in the bottom. Now, I started talking about the pot with no drainage, but I want to backtrack to one of the pots with a hole, especially the terracotta pot that has a very, very, very large hole. Often when you're planting in pots that have large holes, the soil will go through the hole. So this is where a nice little kitchen item comes in handy. It's called a coffee filter. And you just put the coffee filter into the base of the pot, and voila! The soil is not going to go through the hole. Meanwhile, back to the pot that has no drainage. Well, you can use a pot that has no drainage hole. So it's not that you can't, it's that you have to prepare it properly. And to prepare it properly, what you need is you need drainage rocks, or little pebbles, or pumice stone, or little lava rocks. And these are the drainage rocks. So that's what you need. And what you need to do is just put those drainage rocks into the bottom. And then you also need what I call horticultural charcoal. And horticultural charcoal is what I like to prefer to call aquarium grade. Sometimes it can be what is known as consumer grade. So basically what you will do is you'll take the charcoal and very gently and carefully put a little bit of that charcoal in with the drainage rocks. And here's how it works when you don't have a drainage hole. Because you have the rocks in the bottom, when you water, some of that water will accumulate at the base. Because you have the charcoal, that's a filter. That's a filtration system. So when the soil starts getting dry, it'll wick up any water that may be at the base, and also you'll know when to water. So let's take a look at our quintessential houseplant. And often I have people asking me, what type of tools do you want to use when you're potting? And I love that question. And it doesn't matter whether you think it's too simplistic a question to ask or not. It's an important question to ask. So for this houseplant, I will be using your traditional potting mix. And a potting mix is usually peat moss, vermiculite. A lot of it has some fertilizer in it, and it also has some micronutrients, sometimes worm castings and other micronutrients. The other is if I were transplanting or repotting a cactus or a succulent, then I would actually purchase what is called cactus or succulent soil. Or if I was transplanting let's say a orchid, I would use either bark or moss or a combination depending on the particular orchid. So each potting mix is important. And part of why I chose this quintessential gift plant is it needs repotting. It has been in this pot for 2 years, would you believe it or not, and it needs to thrive. Also, if I didn't mention this earlier in the show, you need to repot every 2 or 3 years. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to separate, and I may only have time to repot one of these on the show today. So I am going to start with the corn plant. And the reason is when I look at the corn plant, it seems very healthy. It seems ready to go into a new pot. And even the pothos here, that little viney, little leafy thing here, looks very good, looks very healthy. My Dieffenbachia here, you can't tell from here, it's because it has new growth, so it's got some healthiness to it, but I did lose a couple pieces of it. And then, in honesty, I'm not sure if my palm is going to make it, because the palm is already beginning to have browning on the ends, and as I touch it, as you can see, there's no roots left. And people like to, I say people, but I mean the person that creates these, they love to put in palms because palms are so tall, but often the palms they put in have a very shallow root structure. So I found historically the palms are the most difficult plants to save. I'm going to see if I can save it. I'm going to see if I can rejuvenate it, but I may not have such luck. So what you want to do when you have a houseplant like this is that you want to take each part gently. If possible, you don't want to break up the root ball. Well, as you can see, that didn't work in this case. Unfortunately, the root ball came apart. But that's the nice thing about having this adventure, not knowing what will happen and sharing this with you so that you don't have to be afraid when you decide to transplant something. Now look at this pothos. This is phenomenal. Its root structure is very, very healthy, very intact. That's great. And by the way, this will, weird as it may seem to you, will be salvageable. I will be able to restore that, not a problem. Then finally, there's the Dieffenbachia. It'll survive. It'll be fine. So I'm really excited about that. And I may be able to rejuvenate this because the main stem looks really good. So I'm pleased that this is doing much better than I expected. But this is again where the pot size begins to become important. So I am going to move this aside for now. Let's start with my Dracaena. Because the Dracaena hardly has any roots, in honesty, when I get home, I'm actually going to put this in water and root it in water to start to rejuvenate the roots. Because if I put it in soil now, I would have to literally put it in a pot that is very, very shallow and very tiny. And the smallness of the pot that I have is, I don't have quite the smallest pot. But in the interim, if you find this happens, you don't want these roots to dry out. So in the interim, I am going to put it in this little pot so that it can thrive until it gets to my own little place. And people have asked me, when you're planting, what do you use to get the soil into the pot? Well, right now I'm using my hands, but if I don't want to use my hands, for small plants, I have this, what is known as a narrow or a rock trowel. And part of the reason it's called a rock trowel is because it's meant to be used in rock gardens or in areas where you have very little room to operate. And also this trowel is really good for taking out dandelions and getting down there. So if I choose to leave this in a pot instead of putting this Dracaena in water, what I will also do, and I didn't think to bring it here for the show, is I would get a compound called rooting hormone, and I would put that rooting hormone on the roots. So I could, if I wanted to, grow it this way. The next thing, put that little one aside there, is the pothos. Now the pothos has a better root structure, which means that the pothos, and measuring again, I was right when I told you that this was probably a 4-inch pot. And if you look at the root structure, it's definitely 4 inches. So this was planted in a 4-inch pot. So this pot is a little, believe it or not, this 4-inch pot is a little too wide. So I'm not going to use that. But instead, this pot, which is about 5.5 inches, will work. I'm just looking to see. Yes, this is the best pot that I have, and this will work. So in this case, one of the things I talked about was the depth of the pot. And so in this case, the pot is a little deeper than what I'd like it to be, and I don't have a shallow enough pot this width. So this is where you take the drainage rocks to help increase the height or decrease the height and decrease the depth of this pot. So I'll put my drainage rocks in here. And this would be about halfway, if you want to know how much drainage rocks, this is about halfway. And so the drainage rocks I'm putting in, about 1/3 of the pot is filled with drainage rocks. And then of course I have to put in my horticultural charcoal to help with the drainage. Again, be very careful because horticultural charcoal is extremely dusty, and you don't want those dust particles either in your lungs or in your eyes. And then first a little soil. And then my Dracaena, I'm sorry, the Dracaena's there, my pothos. And that's the other thing. One of the things is sometimes when you're working with a small pot, it's not easy to use your hands to get that soil down. So that's the other reason I like this narrow trowel. But also some people, where did it go, will use either a chopstick or a knitting needle to help get that soil down in there the way you need that soil to be. And after that, you want to make certain that you don't put the soil right up to the top. If you put the soil right up to the top, then anytime you try to water it, the water will fall out of the pot. So you don't want that. What you want instead is you want enough room in the pot. So since this is a small pot, I'm giving it about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch between the top of the soil and the top of the rim of the pot. So that way when I pour water in here, the water won't go out of the pot. And that's the question, is watering. How do I know if I water too much? I mean, we can go with the average rule is maybe once a week for your regular standard houseplants, maybe once a month for your cacti, maybe once a month for your succulents. But what I like to use is what is known as a moisture meter. And I prefer the old-fashioned, I don't like the digital ones. And so what I will do, now obviously I haven't watered this, but I will put the moisture meter in here, and right now it's reading totally dry, to be expected since I haven't watered this. Or some people will use a chopstick or a knitting needle or a straw, and it'll be, think cooking. Basically, you'll put it into the straw, you'll put the straw or whatever into the plant, And if it comes up dry, you better water your plant. That's critical. Well, this demonstration focused on repotting your quintessential gift plant. And as I said, my reason for repotting this plant was to create several plants and extend their lives. So I know now that I've seen the roots, I'll actually end up with 4 plants. So you want to repot your houseplant every 2 to 3 years so that you can rejuvenate the soil and keep those roots healthy. You also want to make sure your plant doesn't get root bound. Believe it or not, I could not find a root bound plant to show you, but that's where the roots are wrapped so tight around the plant and the root ball that the plant can't get any nourishment. And it doesn't matter how much you water it, it still can't get any nourishment. Meanwhile, there are some plants like African violets that like a tight pot. So be careful when you repot those plants not to get a pot that's too wide. And what I mean by a tight pot, the roots of the African violet like to touch the sides of the pot in order to flower. I'm glad you were able to join me today and learn more about repotting your houseplants. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris. If you have any plant or gardening questions, contact me at misty@burkenursery.com. I'd like to thank you for spending your time here with me at Gardening with Burke Nursery, and I'm looking forward to helping you grow your garden.
Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188.